This 12-valve Cummins swapped Ford Explorer is now all put together, but it still has some issues. Let me show you the one that I'm going to fix in this video. So this tire rubs really bad on this fender right here. It's also even worse than that because when I tried to get the thumbnail for my last video, I parked this thing on a stump for the thumbnail and I didn't realize, but that tire was running into the body right there really bad, and it actually smashed up the body pretty good. So these tires have been rubbing so bad that they're actually causing damage to the car now, so I need to do something about that. The first thing I'm going to do to fix this is going to be a little controversial. This is a 37-inch tire. This tire is too big for this car. So I'm going to do what off-roaders rarely do, and I'm going to downsize the tire. When I originally put 37s on this, I bought them for like $200 used, and I just wanted to see if I could get them to fit. And the answer is no, I can't get them to fit. So I got another cheap used pair of tires. This one's a 35, and we're going to make this one fit. I don't want to go smaller than a 35. And then the second thing I want to fix is that when I swapped 1-tons into this thing, I kept them full width, but them being full width means they really hang out kind of an incredible amount. One thing I'm going to do to help with that is first I'm going to add these wide rubber fender flares. They're rubber so they don't damage my width. If I run them into anything, they're flexible. And then they'll do a good job of hiding how wide my axles and tires actually are. And on top of that, I imagine I'm going to be doing a ton of cutting, as much cutting as I can to get these tires to fit. So those fenders are also going to hide all the hackery that's going to go on behind these fenders. Time to put the 35s on these wheels. There's a million videos on the internet about how to take tires on and off, so I'm not going to bore you with all the details. In fact, I even have a video about this on my channel from when I put these 37s on. The things to remember are that first, you want a set of tire irons or tire spoons. This was like 10 bucks at Harbor Freight. Second, you probably want a valve stem core remover. You can get away without this, but removing the valve stem core means that you can put air in a lot faster and remove air a lot faster. You might get away with doing it with the valve stem in, but you might not. It's a very cheap tool, makes things faster and easier. And then the final thing to remember is that there is a dip in the wheel. That dip in the wheel is the side that you need to pull the tire off, because otherwise you're not going to be able to stretch the bead of the tire to get it off all the way. If I remember right, that is on the front, so I need to pull the tire off from the front. Let's get to work. Let's see how long this takes. This is the last tire. I think I figured out that the best way to do this is to not run over it with the truck. That was actually more work than just using the farm jack. And there's a couple hints I picked up along the way. The first one is that you definitely want to soak the entire bead in soapy water before you even start. I knew how important that was when installing the tire. I don't know why I didn't realize how important it was when you're breaking the bead on the tire. But this will really help the bead actually push off that last little bit. And I only have so many tons of pressing force here, so if it's not enough, it's not enough. I need all the help I can get. And then second off, you need a lot of force, and you need it absolutely as close to the bead as you can get it without hitting the tire, which means this foot on my farm jack needs to be right next to the wheel, as close as I can get it. And the front of the tire is the easy part. You can usually get the front in 1 or 2 jacks. It's the rear that's a lot harder. See, there you go. 1 jack and this side's off the bead. Front's not that bad. The back on these wheels has an extra little lip in the wheel that's even harder to get over, but that takes care of that. rotate it 90, break the other side, flip it over, and then it's probably going to take 4 jacks in order to get the other side. So still not trivial. Still be a lot easier with a tire machine, but this is a lot better than trying to run it over at the perfect angle with the truck and all that other shenanigans I was trying to do. All right, I finished getting all these tires mounted, and on the very last one, I was having a bear of a time seating the bead. The reason why was because I only had this air chuck, which when I hit the trigger, it doesn't actually put air in it unless you have it pushed up against the valve, which opens this valve and lets the air out. What that means is you gotta have a valve core in your tire in order for this air chuck to put air in the tire. But if you have a valve core in the tire, now all of a sudden you have a huge restriction, you're not getting very much flow in the tire. So on my final tire, I was not able to get enough flow in order to actually seat the bead. The way I fixed it was I got this air chuck from Amazon, which not only does it have a nice little clip on the end so that I can actually clip it onto the stem and use my other hand to fool with the tire and everything. Now I only need 2 hands instead of 3 hands to use the air chuck. On top of that, if I hit the button, this thing blows air all the time. It doesn't need the valve core to push this thing open. That's another advantage of the clip-on design. So I was able to pull the valve core out, which meant that I got way more airflow and I was able to very quickly seat the bead. I probably spent 45 minutes screwing around with that tire with this stupid air chuck, never able to get the bead to seat. And then as soon as I get this one and remove the core, I was able to get it to seat within like 3 minutes. So if you're going to do this job, I would highly recommend getting one of these clip-on styles where they can blow even if you don't have a valve core pushing on it. I would also highly recommend a valve core removal tool, which means that you can actually pull the valve core out of the Schrader valve. I was tempted to use fire to seat the bead like all the other YouTubers do because it makes for a good video, but this was a lot safer, and it's also repeatable, so I don't have to mess around with blowing the tire onto the rim every time. I realized that on the video, these tires probably look like they're the exact same size as the old one, but every little inch counts. If I hold this up level with the ground here, you can see this tire is not gonna run into this rocker panel until about way up here. That gives me like 14 inches of up travel. That's up travel, not total travel, before I actually run into the body here. And before, it was running into the body all the way down here. There was probably 5 less inches of up travel that the bigger tire could go up before it ran into the body. What that means is that hopefully I won't have to trim the body right here in this spot, which is a really good thing because there's not a whole lot of meat here. This is where the door is. Can't really cut into the door much. This is no longer my limiting spot. So the slightly smaller tires actually made a big difference. But while I have the tires off and the suspension available, there's a few things I do want to fix on the suspension before I go forward. Here's what the new tire looks like on the front. One issue that I've had with these for a really long time and I haven't solved yet is the fact that my camber's off. You can see that the tire is tilted towards the outside quite a bit. Now, granted, it's exaggerated right now because it's not sitting on the tire, it's sitting on jack stands, but still. This pair is in way nicer shape, even though it's still a used pair, and I don't want the camber to wear out the tire immediately, so I'm gonna at least try and get the camber a little better than it is now. This is what the steering knuckle setup looks like on the Dana 50 TTB. You can see that the steering pivots around these 2 points. There's an upper ball joint here and a lower ball joint down here, and the suspension pivots around those. This upper ball joint has an alignment bushing in it, and that alignment bushing allows you to push this steering axis side to side or front to back, and pushing that steering axis one side or the other is what determines your steering angles, camber caster. So I need to get this alignment bushing out. The first thing to do to get it out is to jack up on the hub a little bit. That'll pull all the weight out of here and make it a lot easier to get this out. I don't need to take the whole weight of the car here because then it would just push the bushing up against the other side. I just need to take enough weight that it's kind of floating in here and not pinched by the knuckle. This right here is the alignment bushing. This is the nut for the upper ball joint. And then this cotter pin locks this castellated nut onto here so that it can't spin out. So I need to start by getting this cotter pin out so I can get the castellated nut off. Cotter pin out, flew across the shop somewhere. Next, I need to get this alignment bushing out. In order to do that, I'm going to hammer on the top of this here, because as I do that, it's going to push the ball joint against the alignment bushing and hopefully push this out. In order to not damage these threads here, I'm just gonna leave this castellated nut point where it protects the threads, and then I'm gonna smash this through until that gap's closed. So I mark this nut just in case I ever wanna figure out what the original alignment was on this and put it back to where it was. Then I spray this down with penetrating oil, and hopefully I don't wash off my paint mark. Then I give this a few whacks. The heavier the head on your hammer, the better, because the heavier the head, the more momentum's behind it. This is like a 3-pound or a 5-pound sledge, that's what you want. A little claw hammer is not gonna give you enough momentum to pull this thing loose. Give it a few whacks. And you can see it's loose now. And there's the bushing all the way out. The other thing about these bushings is when you look at them, they're eccentric. This hole is not in the center of the bushing. It's heavily offset to one side. Meaning if I have the bushing and then I rotate it around, then I move where that hole's offset, and if you watch right here, you can see that that's tilting the steering axis one way or the other. See how this part of the knuckle is moving in and out as I rotate this? That's changing my actual steering axis. It's pushing it side to side on the vehicle. So rotating this bushing is how you do an alignment on a TTB or a lot of forward front end suspension. If this hole is closest to the outside of the vehicle, then you have maximum camber. If it's closest to the inside of the vehicle, you have your most negative camber. If it's closest to the front, you're pushing your caster back. Your steering axis is angling to the back, and if you put this hole furthest to the back, then it pulls your caster angle furthest to the front. So wherever this hole is determines your camber and your caster. But if I rotate this towards the outside and forwards, then I'm trading camber angle for caster angle and vice versa. You can't always get your alignment correct with these things because your caster and your camber are being adjusted by the same hole. So as an alternative, they sell these 2-piece bushings. The inside of the bushing rotates independent from the outside of the bushing. And what this allows you to do is gives you a lot more adjustability where you can do your camber and your caster separately. So that's the first reason you want an aftermarket bushing, is so that you can get more fine adjustment over both your angles independently. But the second reason you might want one is, like in my case, I want to really get as much camber out of this thing as possible because it's way over cambered. Look how thin this edge is. The hole is pushed right up against the edge. This bushing can allegedly give me 3.5 degrees of adjustability on the camber. Now, with any large amount of lift on a TTB, 3 degrees of adjustment still might not be enough. And in that case, what you can do is what they call a cut and turn. You cut this beam right here and then you split it and separate it out, which turns the beam up, and then you weld a plate in there. If you need a really extreme camber adjustment, that's how you do it, but I'm not gonna do all that today. I'm just going to see what I can get out of this camber bushing and see if it gets me close enough. One thing that's nice about my setup, which is far from stock, is I also have these parallel beam radius arms in here, which means I can actually adjust my caster angle from here. I can lengthen this beam in order to change my caster this way or shorten the other beam. So I don't actually have to worry about getting my caster right from this bushing. All I'm going to do is max this camber bushing out to suck the tire in, and then the caster I'm going to do with my radius arms here. 2-inch lift springs, I've seen it, you can get your camber back with just these bushings. 3 or 4 inches, you might be looking at a cut and turn. My situation is kind of unique because I don't have stock suspension. This is all 3/4 ton axle stuff. This Dana 50 in the front originally came from a leaf spring to F250, so all the steering and suspension geometry is totally different from what it came from stock. I have no idea if this bushing is going to be enough or not, but we'll find out. Got it back together, got it all settled on the ground, and as you can see, the top of this tire is now obviously tilted inwards. Negative camber. Took my digital protractor and stuck it on the wheel hub, and I think I have about 1.5 degrees of camber going in. That is awesome. So no cut and turn for me. All I needed to do was get those oversized camber caster bushings, and that was plenty. While I'm in here working on tires and suspension, there's one thing I want to fix. This is what this coil spring looks like when the suspension's almost fully drooped. Doesn't look too bad, but if we go to the other side, this is what it looks like when it's at ride height. You can see that there is a severe bend in the coil. The top of the bucket mount is at a completely different angle than the beam is down here at the bottom. And that means that there is a huge bend as it goes up into that coil bucket. This wouldn't be that big of a deal, except the coil's starting to pop out of the bucket a little bit. I did make these spring retainers to try and keep it in, but you can see that's just cracking. If I can even out the bottom of that coil bucket, it'll put a lot less stress on these coils. Let's see what I come up with. So I plasma cut out the blank for this bracket. I took a little different approach this time than I normally do. Normally I would just cut out a few different plates and then stick them together with tabs and slots, which help locate them and lock them into place, and then run a weld bead on that corner joint in order to stick these two plates together. I figured I'd try something different this time though. I'd print it as a flat pattern and then try to bend the corner joint into it. That's what this flat pattern is. These slots here are for a bend line there and a bend line there, and then the slot in the middle is for the bolt. I'm gonna try to bend it on this line here. This is 1/4 inch plate and I don't actually have a bender. I'm just gonna try and bend it in my vise, so who knows if this is gonna work out well. If this does work out, then that's another tool in my toolkit for sheet metal work. The flat pattern with bending might save some time, but if it doesn't work out, then I'll go back to doing it the old-fashioned way. Or I'll buy a bender, one of the two. Try this. So I made 2 of these brackets, 1 for each side. This bracket turned out pretty well. There was a little bit of cracking here, but overall this one looks pretty good. This one not so much. This one cracked all the way through in 2 different places. So here's this part in CAD. I think I figured out where I went wrong. There was just way too much of a gap on the back here. What I should have done is this slot should not have been that big. If I go back to the flat pattern before I added the slot, you can see this line and this line is the actual bend line, and I just went ahead and made the slot the full width of the bend line. I shouldn't have done that. I should have done the width minus 1 bend radius. And then when it folded, hopefully these 2 lines here and here would have been touching, and that would have given me a spot to place the weld on, and it would have been a lot easier to weld this. It also would have given me a little more material here so that when I bent it, these were less likely to crack. That's my takeaway from this. If I'm going to be doing this slotted bend technique in the future, I just need to make the slot less wide. I do want to try this again in the future, but for now I was able to lay enough weld in that I'm confident with this. We're just going to make it work. That's what it looks like sitting on the beam. And then to support the coil, it has this extra bracket on top. And I should have enough room on that bracket to bolt the coil onto it. Where the beam's sitting now is about ride height and it's about level. And then of course, as I go up, it angles one way. As I go down, it angles the other. So at extreme levels of travel, it's still going to have a little bit of coil sticking out wonky, but this will help level the coil out when it's at about ride height and help it stay a little more reasonable throughout its travel. It's welded on. Here's the seat for the bottom of the coil, all welded in and painted. I figured while I was at this, I should set some bump stops. It's gonna be hard to measure how much I need to cut out of these fenders unless I actually have my bumps set. So without the coil in is a good time to measure for this. The best spot I can figure to put this bump stop is right there against the diff. A lot of really thick metal right there, that should work. And then I'm just going to bolt it into the frame there. There it is at full bump. The weight of the car is actually on that bump stop there. It squishes quite a bit before it takes the full weight of the car. It's a pretty heavy car. I think this is gonna work great. Bump stop installed. Now let's see how the tire looks at full bump. That's not too shabby. Definitely the worst spot is still here at the back, but I think I technically clear here at the back now. That is very tight, but not quite touching. So I'll trim out as much of this as I can, and other than this spot right here, I don't think any other trimming's needed. 35s for the win. Since I added bump stops, I figured the next thing I ought to do would be to add some limit straps. So I got to work on fabricating up some mounts for some limit straps. Alright, I start off by welding the top mount for this limit strap. I use these little weld nuts, and then I put a 1/4-inch plate as a backer on that to make sure it's strong and spreads the load across the frame. And then for the bottom, I welded on a tab that gives me lots of options for different sizes on the limit strap. That'll help as the limit strap stretches. I can move it up or down as needed. This is what the limit straps look like in action. These straps will reduce the stress on the coil retainer and make sure that I never try to over elongate the shock. Here's what the Explorer looks like sitting on 35s with all the weight on the tires, everything settled and all that. I actually think it looks really good like this. These 35s fit this thing way better than the 37s do. The next thing is next. Time to start cutting up some bodywork, and then I'm going to stick some rubber fender flares on this. In most states, you can't stick your tire way out past the body of the vehicle. Having a fender that covers the whole tire will at least give me a fighting shot of trying to pretend this thing is somewhat legal. It's also nice for the people who drive behind me to not get rocks and sand and dust flipped up in their face. Let's get to cutting. The plastic body bumpers on this were in the way in some areas and falling off in others, so I opted to remove them. When I did, they left behind a lot of gummy residue, and it turns out there was even some rust underneath, which might explain why they were falling off in the first place. I tried removing this leftover goo with a pressure washer and couldn't get it off. Now I'm going to try a Scotch-Brite pad on an angle grinder. This will take off paint though, so I need to be careful. So the Scotch-Brite pad on the angle grinder absolutely took all that gum off of there. Goo gone and shoe goo and everything wouldn't get it, but a little chemical abrasion got it. Unfortunately, underneath some of it, there were a few spots that were rusty. So I did wear through the paint in a few places, but for the most part, that was the spots that already had bare rusty metal underneath. So either way, this is going to need a rattle can touch-up. But in general, I actually think that looks a lot better. A whole lot cleaner. And it's going to make it a lot easier to put these fenders on, not having all this random body crap in the way. So I removed the rubber stripping that was here that was kind of ugly and falling off, and it turned out there was some rust behind it. I painted over the rust just to make sure it doesn't continue, and then painted some white on the doors and the spots it didn't need. While I was at it, I also painted the bottom here black. There's a bunch of holes here from where the stock side skirt's mounted, and by painting this black, I think it's gonna tie in the fenders a lot better and make it a lot harder to see those holes and make it look better. I ended up removing about that much metal, which will give me a lot more clearance. And then all the metal I removed is going to be hidden by this fender, so it should look all right. On the back, I ended up removing about that much metal. The only issue is that this back quarter curves down a whole bunch like this. So when I put this on, it wants to be all twisted and kind of looks like crap. So what I did is I went in and 3D printed this little spacer. So So I have this 3D printed spacer, and then the fender can sit on that spacer, and that keeps it nice and straight going up around the fender. This little spacer makes this fender look a lot better. In order to get the shape of this curve right, I 3D scanned this part of the quarter panel. You can do that for free with photos from your cell phone using photogrammetry. Don't let any YouTubers sell you 3D scanners that they aren't even willing to pay for themselves. They get them for free from sponsors. Instead, just use free open source software like photogrammetry to do 3D scans. It's free, it just takes photos from your cell phone. I have a whole video on that if you want to see how that's done. And then finally, I just came in and trimmed this rubber to match the body lines of the car. It's just rubber, so you can just trim it with a nice pair of shears or something. I tried to follow this bit of black from the bumper up into the fender, all the way down to this side, and then all the way through to the back. So that's the purpose of spray painting some of this stuff black. But I need to get it outside to see how it actually looks. All right, here's what this thing's looking like in the light of day. You can see the fenders do a lot better job of actually starting to cover those tires. I think this thing's actually starting to look pretty good. It looks pretty complete. Let's pull this thing back up on that stump that damaged the body in the rear before, and let's see how much clearance I have now to that stump. This would be a lot easier with a spotter. Well, without a spotter, I don't want to climb much more than that. The problem is that this whole thing's angled downhill, so even though that tire's not very high, I'm angled downhill, so there's actually a lot of tip factor going on. This is the tire that was rubbing last time, and you can see there are miles before it rubs anywhere. Lots of room here. This front tire here is feeling pretty tippy. It's not hanging on the straps or anything yet, but well, I'm not going any further than this without a spotter. But the lesson to be learned is the tires didn't hit the bodywork anywhere. I had to do a bunch of tight circles in order to position up to this thing, and nothing touched while I was turning, nothing touched in the back when I got it flexed onto this. At the start of the video, doing this tore up my front fender from turning, and it tore up my rear fender where it collided with the body. This is a huge improvement. I think it looks a lot better too. I'm running out of excuses to not take this thing off-roading, so next video, let's do that. Let's do an off-road video. Until then, thanks for hanging out with me in the garage today. Hope to see you next time. Now, get out there and build something.